naked eye, these three cars may seem slightly similar. They're all SUVs that are very off-road targeted. They all have the weird suicide door setup. They all kind of look like they're based off of some truck. You know, they kind of look similar. But really, you have no idea just how similar these cars are. See, a lot of people will explain the element as Honda made that car for this weird person, or Honda made this car because X, and a lot of times they're not really getting the entire movement of the auto industry that caused vehicles, specifically these three, to be in production. So today, I am going to explain the connection between these three vehicles, what was going on in the auto industry at the time. But before we connect them all together and make generalizations, before we do all that, let me explain each one individually and why each brand decided they should pull the trigger on an off-road small SUV of their own. In the 90s, most SUVs were body on frame and based off of a truck, or at least shared many parts with a truck. And this was nice, but there was an issue. You see, wealthier people of a higher class, were beginning to desire these types of vehicles, but the issue was they were very off-putting. They didn't have the smoothest of rides. If you were a truck person or a country person, you could get by. But let's say you were a luxury family living in LA, they weren't really the vehicle of choice. Even if you wanted the all-wheel drive, you're not going to settle for something like a Toyota Tercel all-wheel drive, and all the all-wheel drive sedans that are luxury sedans, like the Volvo S80 V8, are just not going to cut it. You want an SUV, and you can afford an SUV, but the issue is they're too big, they're too hard to park, and this entire market share of rich luxury people that wanted SUVs was eaten up purely by Land Rover. That's what started the company, and that's what kept it going. Well, not really started it started with Jeeps and stuff, but you know what I'm saying. Like, in the later years with the Discovery, and, and the Range Rover, and the Evoque, all of that was for a specific audience, and they knew that, and they owned that market share of small SUV that is lovable, that people of a wealthier status could afford, and that they wanted, that they liked, that drove more like a car, that was more what they were familiar with. And you see, luxury brands like Lexus and BMW and, of course, Mercedes caught on to this, and they thought, why don't we just take a car, lift it, give it all-wheel drive, shape it like a box, and then we can call it an SUV. And that's exactly what they did. Like the Lexus RX, often claimed for the original, the ancestor of the modern SUVs that we have today, or the iconic Mercedes M-Class. These were essentially just luxury sedans with all-wheel drive, which they had already, with slightly higher off-the-ground suspension, and they were boxy. And for more luxurious people, they liked this. Why? Because they rode better, they drove better, they were more luxurious. They were just more familiar to them, more what they were accustomed to, and yet they were still SUVs and were still off-road capable. Essentially, what they did was, instead of making a body on frame, instead of making it an SUV like a Jeep, they just said, why don't we take a car, we take some of this Play-Doh, some of this car metal Play-Doh, and sculpt an SUV out of it, and that's exactly what they did. However, there was still an issue in Toyota's lineup. There was a big disconnect between what the average person can afford and the offerings of SUVs from Toyota. You could get a Land Cruiser, you could get a 4Runner, but those were all big and expensive. If you wanted something small, you got a Lexus RX, but you had to pay for it. So Toyota figured, why don't we make a car, make it a hatchback, cater to the people that are actually going to buy it, and make it an SUV. See, Toyota's really good at catering. Let's say, for example, let's say a family wants to buy a car. Well, that car is probably going to be pretty expensive. So let's make a car catering to people who don't have that much money. Well, oftentimes those people are not going to have kids. Those people are not going to have a family, and they are going to want the cheapest car possible, which means you can remove some rows of seating. You can remove some size. You can give it a smaller engine, and you can actually make it affordable. So, however, Toyota had the luxury SUVs and the fancy SUVs down pat, but really the king of their lineup that really made SUVs accessible was... And that is exactly what Toyota did. They made 2-door and 4-door versions in the 90s. They stuck to 4-door, but made the overall size pretty much the same, but feel smaller, look a little bit cuter, and came out with the second generation. And this was working well. If you had a family, you probably had money, which meant that you probably wanted the Lexus RX, or the Land Rover, or the 4Runner, or the Land Cruiser. If you didn't have money, or you didn't have a family and you just wanted small to commute around, and you didn't want to pay that much for gas, and you didn't want to pay for all that extra family room, you got the RAV4. there. But you see, there was an issue. You see, families previously had stuck with minivans, but now minivans were being phased out. Chrysler was having a hard time selling the town and country, and when that happens, that's when you know all hell is broken loose and the shit has hit the fan. That means, if the best minivan, the best seller minivan can't sell, that's an issue. And families were looking for alternative versions of transport. And Toyota saw that this little, fun they were having with these fun portable light SUVs was soon about to shift. The wake-up call, you ask? The 2001 newly launched Mitsubishi Outlander. Toyota saw this, and all of a sudden, alarm bells were going off. This symbolized a new era of SUVs. Now, this would have been, doesn't matter at all if it didn't sell, but it did. And Toyota knew that they needed to make the RAV4 bigger. The RAV4 was already named. They already had established reliability and off-roadness, and they didn't want to launch a new SUV that they'd have to rebuild that reputation for. And, families, they were looking for cars too. The RAV4 was already established, and they said, let's just make a RAV4, let's make it beefier, let's make it more familiar, let's give it a third row, let's give it a V6, all-wheel drive, let's make this the most decadent RAV4 ever. But there was an issue. This new RAV4 wouldn't cater to the old RAV4 customers. They wanted something fun, something light, something airy. And with the launch of the new RAV4, it would feel like a betrayal to some of Toyota's lineup. But they knew they had to do this. These families were looking for vehicles. Families care about reliability. The RAV4 already had a reputation, and it was time to make a RAV4. So what they would have to do was they would have to do the catering trick again. Essentially, what they would do is they would take a RAV4, and since all the families could have this car, they would boil it down to the customer base who would buy an ultra off-road RAV4, which means in that pot that can get boiled, the stuff that can get boiled out, that can get put into the air is, a row of seats that's easily accessible and can fit a car seat. You don't need that. That can go out of the pot for the new, RAV4 semi-replacement. You can also, if you keep boiling, a second set of doors that are fully opening, you don't need that. That can get boiled right out of the pot. Also, fuel economy. They want something small. They're probably going to blow their money on it if it looks cool and it looks like it can go off-roading, which is the entire point, because if they want fuel economy, they can always get the regular RAV4, so they don't really need fuel economy, so make it big, make it a big hunk. That goes right out of the pot. So essentially, they boiled down a RAV4, they got, all the family buyers, they didn't have to worry about them. They didn't have to worry about your average typical buyer. This was just for the people who wanted an off-road vehicle, for the qualities of the RAV4 that made it good at being a small off-roader. That's all they needed to keep. And in 2003, they came out with the Toyota FJ Cruiser concept. It was a RAV4 without any of the things that would appeal to a normal person or a family. Gas mileage, terrible. Seating, uncomfortable. Rear cargo space, semi-acceptable. Wheels, huge. Ground height from the ground, what do they call it? Ride height, ground clearance, huge. It was everything, every good aspect of the RAV4 boiled down for the consumer who only bought the RAV4 for off-roading. And it was based off of the Land Cruiser Prado. Now remember, the Land Cruiser Prado is a 4-door SUV, but this, it's still a 4-door SUV, but it's more like a truck where it has like the tiny little doors in the back, and it just worked. So essentially it was a Land Cruiser Prado, except all the important bits, all the practical bits were boiled out, and what you got left was this dune buggy looking huge door, 3 windshield wiper wide behemoth. And it was marvelous. And the system worked well. All the family buyers and the people that cared about fuel economy and the average day Corolla buyers that wanted something with all-wheel drive would get the RAV4. All the families that needed a third row but didn't want to admit that they need a family SUV got a family SUV, by which I mean they got the RAV4. But all the people who didn't want a RAV4, they wanted something purely a small SUV that could off-road, they got the FJ Cruiser. And lucky for Toyota, they were not wrong about this big, bubbly family SUV craze. In fact, even Honda jumped on it with the 3rd generation Honda CR-V. It was bigger, it was wider, it was closer to the ground. Kind of like they changed the style of things to look bigger, to look more family friendly, without really changing the dimensions that much. It's a trick with styling, and especially under Japanese car companies, they can do a lot in terms of what a car looks like just by styling it, just by making the dimensions and the curves slightly different. And this was bulbous. It was bulbous, it was big, it was for families, V6, family SUV. And they had the same issue Toyota had. In fact, they had an even bigger issue. Like Toyota, they had a big body-on-frame SUV, except it wasn't actually a Honda. It was an Isuzu, and Honda was always really, really, really good at small cars. And Honda, they wanted to branch out. They did it with the Odyssey. They tried to make the Odyssey weird, and it didn't work. The first generation Odyssey didn't have sliding doors. People didn't like it. People didn't buy it. They made it a normal minivan with the second generation. Honda wasn't going to screw it up with SUVs. They were going to make the plainest, safest SUVs on the planet. It was time that they actually put some work into it. See, rebadging an Isuzu is nice, it's easy, it's cheap, but Honda wanted a product of their own. A Honda they could be proud of, a new Honda SUV lineup that would knock their socks off. So they came out and launched the Honda Pilot. The Honda Pilot was entirely Honda's own creation. It was a car with the qualities of an SUV, with the drivetrain of an SUV, made by a Japanese automaker, completely, well, for the most part, completely from scratch. And it sold well. But this wasn't the only new SUV project Honda had up its sleeve. You see, Honda had a little bit of a problem. New cars are, well, new. When Toyota came to the United States, they launched the Toyota Crown and the Toyota Land Cruiser for a specific reason, a winning reason, and it's what I call the liquid effect. Essentially, you take a car and you boil it down to whatever trait you want to give your brand or a series of vehicles, and you launch that vehicle, even if you know it might not sell as well as a vehicle that maybe were made a little bit worse, or may have a little bit less of the quality that you want, but will probably sell slightly better. And Toyota used this strategy because they wanted the new Toyota Motor Company to be both reliable and durable. The Land Cruiser was liquid durability, and the Toyota Crown was liquid reliability. Honda now needed a liquid vehicle of its own, something just to have one singular purpose in the Honda lineup, and that is to make its brothers look good. See, the issue with this new Honda lineup was Toyota wasn't the only one that got the alarm bells. Honda was working on a family SUV of their own, and they were also planning on calling it CR-V, or the name of the, SUV that had previously been so sprite and off-roady. And again, much like the RAV4 in a very similar story, it was also an SUV that was previously very good off-road and known for that. And the issue was, to the average Honda buyer, it would kind of seem like the Honda lineup kind of got neutered. The issue, why? Well, the Honda Pilot was new. It was unproven. It was a built-from-the-ground-up SUV, a first-generation SUV, and it didn't have a single thing that it didn't have to prove. It had to prove reliability, it had to prove durability. It needed help. And right now, the entire reputation of the new Honda Pilot depended solely on the Honda CR-V. However, the Honda CR-V, which may be providing some off-road prowess to the Pilot by association, will not be providing that anymore in 2006 when the third generation launches and it loses almost all of its off-road credibility. So they needed something fast. They thought, why don't we just keep the second generation Honda CR-V and then, just keep it and just make the third generation and call it something else. Call it like the CR-V Sport or something. And well, they kind of did. What they did was they took the second generation Honda CR-V. They made it look, they did, again, remember, they boiled it down. They didn't need to sell to families. They already had the perfect family car coming on the way. They didn't need to sell the same base that the CR-V, sold to. And in fact, they didn't want to. They wanted that CR-V, because remember, it'd still be sold for another 3 years because the Element launched in 2003. They wanted it to still sell. So it couldn't be a CR-V, even though it had to be based on the second generation CR-V. So what they did, they made it look off-roady. They gave it a few more less doors. They made it wacky on the inside. They gave it different commercials, different styling, and blimey, it worked. And then when the eventual CR-V came out, it worked. The CR-V was big, it was bulbous, it wasn't great off-road. The Pilot now had some off-road reliability of itself, but it had only been 3 years, and it was just gaining its reputation, and the Element did the heavy lifting. It was the cool car, the fun car, the good off-roading car, the durable car that gave the other two cars more reliability, more perceived durability, and more perceived off-road readiness just by association. The Nissan Pathfinder. You see, this is an issue with Nissan. They were going to use the same liquid trick, but I'll explain why in a minute. But first, the issue with Nissan. Amana. Amana both makes washing machines and commercial air conditioning systems, except you would never be able to tell because the dishwashers and appliances are made by Whirlpool Maytag, and the air conditioners, except for the portable ones, are made by Dawkin International. That's kind of how Nissan works. The trucks are kind of their own thing, the vans are kind of their own thing, and their cars are kind of the thing as well. And this worked, notice the word worked, because they were separate. A Nissan Sentra would never be in the same lane as, per se, a Nissan Pathfinder. It worked. But soon there was about to be an issue. You see, Nissan saw the success of these other SUVs, and they wanted one for themselves. But before they could do this, Nissan wasn't going to make these SUVs off-roady. In fact, what they were going to do was just take their existing cars and pull a Lexus, a little bit less convincingly. And the issue was the large divide. This gap was huge. You had the 2003 Nissan Murano, which was the SUV they really cared about, and then later the 2008 Nissan Rogue, and these were essentially just Nissan Versas and Nissan Sentras and Altimas lifted and molded to look like an SUV. They were not off-road capable in any sense of the word. They were just SUV-shaped cars. And that was in very, very sharp contrast with the Nissan Pathfinder. And the Murano was coming out in 2003, so they needed to do something now. They needed to do something yesterday. So, before I give you the answer, let me ask you a little question. Let's say there's this shade of blue that you really, really like, and there's this shade of black that you kind of like, but what you'd really love is a nice, dark, deep blue, because you just love dark blue. You want less pigment, you just want to make it dark. You want a hybrid of them both. So what would you do? Well, you'd mix them, and that's exactly what Nissan did. That's the whole point of the Nissan X-Terra, to be a blend, to make that transition between Nissan Rogue or the Nissan Murano, between the Nissan Pathfinder, not so excruciating, and I mean excruciatingly large. And that was the Nissan X-Terra. It was a blend of both. It was based off the Nissan Frontier. The Nissan Frontier was a Nissan truck. It was a dyed-in Datsun, commercial truck. And they took that and they, affordable Nissan did. They gave it plastic cladding. They made it look a little bit cute. They marketed it like a normal, Nissan. And that would be enough to bridge that giant, voluptuous, huge gap between their commercial trucks and their new and upcoming SUVs. And it worked beautifully. Also, and this is kind of a minute point since they already had a Pathfinder, they needed liquid off-road performance in a small package to make the Rogue and the Murano look more capable. That's why the Nissan X-Terra launched just a few years before the Murano, when I bet they were working on the Murano at the same time they were working on the X-Terra, to prepare the buyers for Nissan to enter the small family SUV market. Well, it's like you're building up a reputation for the car before it comes out. I mean, Rogue. Rogue isn't a very good name, and Nissan could crap out a new car today called Rogue if they had never had a Rogue before, and it would be like weird. It'd be like, who would buy that? I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. I'm not taking my chance. I'm not financing that. They wanted people to buy their cars, so what they had, and especially Nissan was very strong in the 2000s. Very strong. They had the Nissan Quest. They had this design language. They had the vertical sunroof. They had so many things that made them stand out, and now they were coming out with two SUVs that were going to match that aesthetic. But the issue was they're SUVs, and a lot of those buyers aren't going to choose a Nissan over a Toyota or a Honda if they're not off-road capable, and that was the job of the X-Terra. So now that we've covered these three, let's move on to the overall big picture, which I'm sure you're already being able to see already. Three SUVs and three reasons why they exist, and three things that all of them share in common. Number one, they all bridge a gap. Whether it's between the Pathfinder and the Murano, between the CR-V and the Pilot, between the RAV4 and the 4Runner, they all bridged a gap that was very widespread and very, very hard to sew together. Very, 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 very far away. Just gigantic gap, and they bridge that. Second, the idea of being boiled down. The idea of taking a car that's job is to suit everybody. And just, I gotta be families, but I've gotta be off-roady, and I've gotta be cheap, but I've gotta be expensive, but I've gotta be luxurious, but I have to be cheap. Just being pulled back and forth in all directions. Taking a car like that and alleviating some of the pressure. And some of that pressure is honestly the most annoying pressure, because it's really hard to build. Think about this. Think about it. You're a car company like this. You're trying to make an SUV that suits the most amount of people. And if you could get rid of one qualification that SUV had, would it be A, appealing to families? B, appealing to gas mileage, or C, appealing to off-roaders? Well, appealing to off-roaders is the easiest because then you get better gas mileage and it's suitable to families. If you take the families away, then you just get good gas mileage and off-road, which doesn't work. And if you take the family away, then you get... No, if you take the gas mileage away, then you get family and off-road, which works, but really not that well. Especially, remember, these are all products of the recession, of the 2008 recession, or at least they would be eventually, and that's how they all kind of died. And so they needed to actually earn their sales. And I will say they all did relatively well. The Nissan X-Terra was made for a decade. That's right, and I don't mean 10-year vehicle as in that it was made for 10 years. I mean the single second generation of the X-Terra sold all the way from 2006 to 2016. The FJ Cruiser, that held out all the way until 2013. Again, badly bashed by the recession. Didn't sell well. Sales were already dead. Toyota, at least they kept it along enough to keep trying. And then they eventually killed it for bigger and brighter horizons. And then the Honda Element stayed after 2011. Honda was by far the worst off out of Nissan and Toyota, out of the big three Japanese brands, out of Nissan and Toyota, and also kind of Subaru and Mazda. They were the worst off out of these three, so they had to kill it after 2011 because they could not financially support a car that wasn't going to sell. These three brands were pretty lucky. These were pretty much the only casualties for these brands. I mean, think about it. We lost Suzuki just because of that recession alone. So, I mean, if that killed them off, then they lasted long enough where I think it was kind of justified. But also, you want to know what makes me think that this is still an issue today? Because look at the gap vehicles that we have now. The Toyota Corolla Cross and or CHR, the Nissan Qashqai, or here in the United States, the Nissan Rogue Sport, and the Honda HR-V. Think about it. When you think about it, these are nothing like the other ones. They're not off-roady at all. They're not off-road SUVs or nothing like that. Well, think about what happened to each of them. All of them, the Honda CR-V, the Toyota RAV4, the Nissan Rogue, all moved up class. They moved more luxurious, more expensive, bigger, less fuel economy, more room for families, and yet more off-road capable. They all moved in that direction. Each of them went upscale. And so now they didn't need the all-wheel drive SUV, they didn't need liquid durability anymore. They already had that. They already had their own reputations. What they needed was to take some of the price burden off, because it can't both be a great off-roader and a great family vehicle and great gas mileage for a low price, and that's what these are for. Essentially, each of the cars ended up, like they did the first time, splitting into two pieces, one to handle the cheap stuff, the people who don't have families. Sound familiar? That's what all of these are doing. So essentially, the demand for a car, like a car that has served so many purposes that it just can't do it all. Like the Corolla, you may ask, how did they get by? They didn't. You had the Camry Solar to take the sportiness off the Camry. You had other sedans. You had the Yaris to take it off the Corolla. They had lineups. SUVs really weren't the same way in those beginning years in some ways. Now, we've progressed and we have more SUVs now, of course, more options. In some ways, it's still kind of true. I mean, their job really is to act as the Toyota Yaris for the Corolla, and then the Corolla for the Camry, and then the Camry for the Avalon. They all take a burden. Imagine if Toyota had one sedan. It would be too big for some. It'd be too small for some. It'd be not expensive enough. It'd be too expensive. It would just not enough gas mileage. Too much gas mileage. It would just not fit anyone's needs. A jack of all, master of none. And that's what these, in the end, what all these have to do is essentially a car bears too much burden, and these help A, give it a better reputation, launch a new product, or in the case of these, which is really just one of the three things that the three cars did in the beginning, take some heat off of the model that they were meant to represent. Alright, now we're moving on to something fun. This is where we look at the pamphlets and then look at the used prices, and then, yeah, that's it. Also, most of these will be for Car of the Month, so I'm not going to do, generations and stuff like that from now on, because I just think it's trio tales, not if you want to buy this car, you should do XXX and X. So let's just look at some listings, shall we? This is the later days. This is the last facelift of the Element. Watch my video on the Honda Element. It was Car of the Month, I think 2 months ago. Yeah, see, these all kind of turned to desperation after the 2008 financial crisis, and they really started selling them. You see, if you have, like, a favorite car or something, and they start putting out really good pamphlets, I only have one for that one because they didn't make a whole lot, and they only start putting out pamphlets, here's the first generation, before the facelift, yeah, rugged guy. They slowly made it more and more, like, baby face Nissan over the years. This is pretty rugged. This is very, like, again, with the transition from Nissan, like, think about it this way. Think about it like one of Nissan's CVTs. The more that the rugged SUVs get rugged, the more that the Nissan SUVs get more baby-faced. It's right in the middle. So this was very rugged in the beginning because, well, all that Nissan sold was the Pathfinder. Then when the Murano came out, they made it a little bit more baby-faced, and then when the Rogue came out, they really needed an overhaul. It's like when, you know, something bad, you need bad news and you need a drink. I mean, they made it just so baby-faced, so Nissan, just so, they tried to make a truck that felt like a car, and they did a great job, honestly. So this got more and more baby-faced over the years, but it was still a fantastic, very well-performing vehicle in the second generation. Bigger engine, more towing, more everything. This was also a first aid kit back there. I'm also really glad that, there's an entire community of people that scan pamphlets like this. I've done it a few times. So, like, if you have some of these, like, just lying around, like, this is part of history. Like, scan those. Get those online. See, they're circling that for stuff. I just think it's so neat how we can look back into history and see all the colors and stuff. I like the yellow. I think the yellow is very, very classy. I also like car bras were never really neat, but I think they're pretty functional. Again, this is when they're trying really hard. They remade the pamphlet. I think in 2015 again they still got that thing there, that weird hump there. No, in 2013 I think they remade it because they discontinued it in 2015 for the 2016 model year. They were trying hard. They also after 2008, it started to get more luxury, and then they realized that it wasn't going to sell as luxury, so then they put it less luxury. Like, they gave it this and that hideous steering wheel, but they never really gave it, like, crazy leather or, like, tan heated seats. They never went all in with it, but it was still a very, very, very nice car. Oh, they gave it gray leather, nice. But it's still, I mean, look at the interior. It still stayed pretty utilitarian, even in its nicest model. Moving on. 2014 FJ Cruiser. The FJ was such a neat car. I mean, Toyota, I don't really like the excuse for why car companies make things as, oh, well, they like making it. You know, they just felt like it. That's never how anything works. But for this, Toyota that's kind of what they did. I mean, I'm sure there were real applications, but this was kind of the most Subaru Toyota ever. You know, just all-wheel drive, everything you can fit in, because that really was its job. And then here's the 2007. This is like the older one. 3 colors, color rules available, 4x4, 4x4, and 4x2. Crazy. You can get the 6-speed manual or the 5-speed auto. 23,000. Woo! See, again, not cheap, especially for back then. Moving on, Honda Element listings. These are pretty, listen, there's like a sweet spot. If you get like an SC, that's going to cost you, and also the mileage. These Hondas got really expensive in 2020, and now they've just been driven. So if you can, like, see, these are all high mileage ones. You get like 4,000, 5,000. When I put the price, the lowest mileage here, watch this price. It should be at like $4,000 for like crazy, and then 18,000, 21,000, 16, I'm telling you, and that's for 63. So these get really pricey, and it's not like a Prius where you can replace the battery and get away with high mileage. So I would go with one that's like lower mileage if you can afford it. It seems to ramp down pretty quick, but I mean, still, that's kind of ridiculous. The X-Terra is just a good work vehicle. Like, if you're planning on getting a Nissan truck, get the X-Terra instead. You're not going to regret it. It'll still fit all the same shit your truck will fit. It's a very neat car, a very beautiful car. I mean, it was great. Also, with the Elements, personally, I like the 2000. Watch the video. If you're looking to buy one of these, don't just use this. Don't just take this advice. Look at the actual entire video I made on it. Get one after the 2006, I want to say, because they didn't have curtain airbags as standard in the previous things. Like this, don't buy this. Don't buy it. Didn't have curtain airbags. Even though I think this is far superior to this. I think this is just pretty ugly. I much prefer the cladding in those wheels. But it doesn't matter. You can always buy the wheels and the cladding aftermarket. And the FJ Cruiser. Again, look at that. This is another one with... See? They're pretty cheap. The FJ Cruiser, it's just a lot of car, which is why it's so expensive. This isn't... It's kind of collectible. There's kind of a community, but not as strong as the Element. I mean, they have a nickname for the Honda E, for the Honda Element, even though there is technically a Honda E, but that's discontinued now. It was pretty niche. Anyway, there's not really a community. The reason why these are so expensive is just because, first of all, A, it's a Toyota, so it's going to hold its value better than anything else on this list. And B, I mean, it's just a big car. It's just a gigantic car. I mean, a Cadillac Escalade used is going to cost just maybe a few $100s more than like a Mercury Sable used because it's a bigger car. I mean, you just pay for size. But, you know, all these cars are kind of at the age where when you look at listings, they say it has good tires because that's how cheap it is. But anywho, yeah, so I'll see you all real soon. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. I had a really fun time, and I hope you did too. All right, see you all real soon. Goodbye now.